We're all about charity, and today's shout-out is for Women's Refuge, a name that sadly should be familiar to us all. Its purpose is the prevention and elimination of domestic violence against women, children and whānau, and it does incredible work. Check out how they do it at womensrefuge.org.nz. They are Chye-Ling's charity of choice today.
Sex, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the speculative interdimensional vehicle, Sex in Space. Its mission, to explore new points of view, to seek out fresh opinions, to boldly go where so many have gone before, and still somehow manage to totally miss the point. Subscribe to Sex in Space, wherever quality podcasts are found.
Hello, I'm Tim.
Hello, I am Jess.
And welcome back to another episode of Sex in Space. This is our mega project that explores sex across all of its infinite dimensions.
And it's also trying to turn the awkward into the straightforward and have some fun while we're at it. So today we have an amazing interview we did with Chye-Ling Huang, who is a Chinese-Pākehā director, writer and actress and co-founder of Proudly Asian Theatre Company, which is dedicated to showcasing and empowering Asian storytellers in Aotearoa. Now she's here to talk to us about her documentary, Asian Men Talk About Sex, and her experience of the intersections between sex, sexuality and Asian identity in New Zealand. And they're also actually playing a character on Shortland Street called Theo at the moment, who I believe is bisexual. So it's really exciting to see Chye-Ling not only doing that work, creating space for other people to tell those stories, but as well telling those stories themselves. So this was an amazing interview and I hope you enjoy.
And now, the interview.
Super interested in the documentary Asian Men Talk About Sex and how you got there. What was its origin story?
My birth. My parents met. No, I mean largely like that's a joke, but also it's truth. Most of my work has centered around kind of biracial diaspora, racial cultural identity mesh. Mm-hmm. So my dad is Chinese Malaysian. So my family is originally from Xiamen on his side, which is in China, south. And his nationality is Malaysian because they fled the communists and ended up in Malaysia. He was born there and then he came to New Zealand when he was 18 to Christchurch. Yeah. Here's where it gets interesting. So he met my mum, who's Pākehā with Irish and English roots. And then I occurred. So I'm a mix of these two things. Yeah. And I think that has just kind of influenced the way that I see the world and interact for most of my work in life. So Asian Men Talk About Sex is no different, but it was a bit more personal maybe. So yeah, I think like it wasn't a super current kind of learning in my life, but a couple of years prior I started to unravel my cultural, racial preferences around sex and dating. So I guess previously, for most of my life, I sort of gravitated towards like the tallest, whitest man in the room with glasses, preferably. And people tell me I date guys that look like birds as well. So that's
tallest,
kind of
whitest man in the room
in
with
this
glasses
room I am
too?
now, yeah, currently.
Kind of bird-like, yeah. I don't know.
I don't know. I've been told I look like a llama.
Oh,
yeah.
So that's not in your range.
That's such a good visual for the listeners. Yeah, he's like somewhere between a llama and a bird.
So by bird-like, do you mean sort of like skeletal?
Big noses.
Oh, big noses.
And
beefy.
This is great.
Yeah. So everyone knows my type. Great. Yeah. No. So I started to dissect that. I think I was like in a period where I was like finally single after a string of long-term, like 1 or 2 year monogamous relationships, and just getting back out there. And I think it's like, you know, in the upsurge of Tinder, back in the day. You can kind of just like see your preferences laid out in front of you as you're going through. So you're kind of just being challenged with images, and that's it. And so I think something in that got me thinking, man, is this like super problematic? Where does that come from? And how did I get there? Because I am Asian. And if we're going by, Freud, then I should be dating someone that's like my dad, right? Or maybe the opposite of that is happening. So it just made me think a lot about it. And over the next few years, I started unraveling that whole thing. And through the process of that, I think looking at my own race in particular, Chinese and Asian men, and beginning to widen my conversations around that with people, with dating, with sex, a lot of really gross things kind of jumped out to me about the desexualization of Asian men and the hypersexualization of Asian women. And so we decided to make a documentary about it because Loading Docs was coming up. Which was a great platform run by some really powerful and interesting women who their kaupapa at the time was to make 3-minute documentaries, which they've now kind of expanded to like 7 to 15. But yeah, just threw that idea in, and
brilliant.
There we were.
And when you started scratching the surface and speaking to the guys, how did that kind of unfold for them? Were they willing to talk about it? Had they sort of realised it themselves? Is it something that is quite kind of apparent?
Yeah, it was interesting because some guys had never thought about it before.
Yeah.
And some men had just, dissected every inch of it. And that surprised me too, because I was like, you're living this experience. Like, how are you so blind to this? Or how are you so unwilling to, see the wider social context of it? But, some men, it just wasn't their experience for whatever reason. And I had to just go like, yeah, no, that's my prejudice too against this. I was expecting it all to be kind of one flavour. But it was super interesting. So the way that we approach people, we basically, we had a little bit of a hard time finding willing participants because we're not, like big hotshot documentary makers. We're just a bunch of people who want to make a cool thing. Not yet. Season 2 is coming up. Just saying. Going to plug that later. We shoulder tapped a lot of people that we knew. A lot of those people being actors who are kind of comfortable sharing themselves. But also we wanted to go kind of as diverse as possible in terms of talent. So we did random call-outs. We met people we've never met before. But a way that we kind of tried to make it safe and get people on board was we invited a bunch of people to a dinner. So it was kind of like a potluck thing. We cooked. We made this huge spread of like lots of different Malaysian food, primarily. And we had a bunch of questions that we had in a bowl. And then as we ate, we got each of the guys to pull out a question, and they were kind of hosting their own kind of like interrogation or questionnaire. And it was recorded for our own internal use in terms of helping us like shape the documentary and actually find out what these guys wanted to talk about and what their experiences were. But it also served to create an environment where the men involved felt like they were all kind of on the same page, and even if we were interviewing them separately, which we were, they could get a sense of the fact that this is sort of a more global conversation and could feel connected to a community within that to feel safe to share what they had to share. So yeah, and then the people after that dinner who wanted to be involved, which I think was pretty much everyone, they signed up and we shot it out. Yeah,
and it covers different sexuality too, right?
That's
an interesting sort of tangent, I suppose.
Were there patterns that emerged, like even though you were looking at diverse sexualities, the patterns that emerged that you noticed?
Yeah, Asian men as being desexualized, bottom of the food chain, having a marginalized experience when it comes to sex and dating, and just being seen as the most undesirable subcategory of dude, especially in gay circles and in queer culture, especially. That stuff was really gross with the men that we interviewed. And having done a bit of my own research, it feels like it's more distilled in terms of the actual kind of discrimination is really overt in gay male circles against Asian men. And I've heard it described to me a million times as like a pyramid of, you know, who's at the top, who's at the bottom in terms of most desirable to least desirable, and Asian men are at the bottom.
Right. So and how does that sort of manifest in terms of what, like, is it a power structure, or is it just desirability?
It's swipes and matches and dates.
Right.
It's also in the expectations of Asian men, especially in gay circles. It's more about, you know, expecting Asian men to be a certain kind of person, which is submissive. They should bend to the will of their partner because they're lucky enough to even be going on a date with this person. They are seen to be bottoms or submissive,
right?
And just generally take what they can get because they're the lowest of the low.
Right. So sort of fetishized, possibly, is that a
fetishized as well.
Yeah.
Always fetishized as a submissive in that dynamic, in the sexual dynamic. But yeah, kind of just super mistreated in that way.
And if not, at the bottom rung, often excluded completely. Yeah? Like I've heard a lot of no Asians being specifically on people's profile.
No rice, no spice.
Oh,
that's the common way to put it. If you want to be hip with the kids,
right?
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Mean.
No rice, no spice. No Asians or Indians. People don't really see Indians as Asian a lot of the time, but they are. Newsflash.
And so that you see that a lot in queer culture, but not necessarily in heterosexual.
Yeah. I think from what I've heard and researched across queer male dating apps, it's much more overt, and there are a lot more categorizations that you can actively choose or not choose to filter out. So you can filter by race in some of these apps. You can filter by like height or type. People can categorize themselves as, you know, whatever, like, kind of archetypes they want, like bear, otter, etc. And then I think that kind of culture has bred this racial preference, you know, as being something that you are allowed to just overtly say yes or no. No rice, no spice, no Indians, no Asians. Looking for Pākehā men. Don't approach me if you're brown. Like, all of this stuff is just out there.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen it on straight dating apps as overtly.
Yeah. So you noticed your own preferences when you're using those apps?
Yeah, I was like, man, I resonate. No rice, no spice. Yeah, fuck yeah. No. No, I mean, yeah, I think I did because I sort of just had to, all I had to do was just look back at my dating history and go like, yep.
There's a pattern.
There's a pattern,
sure,
and that's gross because if you're not aware of it, then it usually means something. Ignorance is not healthy. Yeah, I think, and we should always be looking at why we're making the choices that we're making so that we can make informed decisions. And I think, unraveling that was a bit of a journey because it was more of cool. I can see this is happening, but why?
For the guys who you interviewed who were on the documentary, did you? I mean, I know you can't speak for them, but you were there. Did you notice that there was a shift in them, or that the experience of doing the documentary was empowering in any way? Like,
yeah, I did. And at the end of it, we had a debrief. We had our launch, and speaking to the guys across the board, they felt a huge sense of solidarity and of empowerment in having those conversations. And through each interview, because we interviewed for so long, we would interview for like at least an hour or more for like a 3-minute documentary. We had 8 guys, we interviewed 10, which was a learning curve, but so valuable and so interesting. But yeah, through each interview, a huge part of the experience of sexuality and Asianness is that it's a cultural taboo a lot of the time, because most of the people I spoke to were either diaspora or like 1.5 generation, so they're sort of like grown up in this westernized hybrid, but still having the cultural values of their parents hanging over them, which doesn't allow talk about sex ever. It's a huge taboo. And also in terms of like, you know, male Asianness, men tend to have a hard time talking about sex in general because it's something that they're supposed to inherently just be the bomb at and, you know, not have any issues. And if you're talking about it, you're vulnerable. And if you're vulnerable, you suck.
You suck.
Yeah, and it's not it's not seen as attractive. But I mean, I think the tide is definitely turning. But yeah, I got the feeling that it was a very freeing experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's cool though that you could give that to some people, I guess.
And afterwards, people would hit me up about it. Like after the documentary came out, it was so bizarre because before we went in, we were like, are we going to be able to find enough Asian men to like fill this thing out and have a diverse, you know, amount of voices and ages? And, you know, I got my dad to do it because I was
That's
like...
your dad on there.
I wondered
my
about
dad.
You asked
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's my dad. But after it aired and it was cool, we had so many people come to us and approach us and being like, can I be on it? Are you going to do another one? I'm like, you
Or can I
willingly
just-
want
can I
to put
talk to
yourself on
someone?
camera talking
Yeah.
about sex? This is so cool.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So your dad was open to it?
Yeah, he thought it was a joke, and I was like, no, this is for real.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, sure. And then when the time came to shoot, I was like, cool, so we're penciling in you for next week? And he was like, oh, okay. Well, fuck it, yeah.
Oh, I have so much respect for your dad. My
Yeah.
dad would
Yeah.
not do that.
I think because he's a really unique guy because he grew up in a very strict patriarchal culture in Malaysia, under a very, you know, traditional Chinese Confucius Taoist household. So no talk about sex, no sex before marriage. They didn't want him to marry my mum because she's white. So that took a bit of time and energy. But he was kind of the black sheep of his family before he moved over. And they got to choose whatever country they wanted to study in. And he chose New Zealand. And he always embraced the Western culture because of what he saw as the Westerners' openness to love and romance and affection. So he already had something inside him that was craving what he wasn't getting from his own family dynamics or his own kind of cultural expressions of love that were, you know, inhibiting him. So by the time he got here, he was stoked. He was ready to go. He was a romance man.
Oh, bless him.
And I think because I don't know if he expected this going in, but by the time we did the interview, I was super surprised at what he was sharing particularly around his infidelities with my mum. So they're separated now, and he cheated on her a bunch of times. And he really dissected that as coming back to unhealthy attitudes around sex and love and what that all meant.
And he'd actually managed to do that himself. He'd got to that place.
He'd come to that conclusion. This is years on after separating, you know, I can't even remember how many, like 15 years ago or something. But it all kind of came out in the interview, and I was like, hearing things I'd never heard before, and it was very intense.
So did his sort of attitude, like directly, indirectly inform or mould you? And the fact that, you know, you've clearly, this isn't the only thing you've done around the sex topic, is it? There's Like Sex as well.
I directed that. That was a Nathan Joe play.
Yeah.
So he's in the documentary as well, if you want to check him out.
Awesome. But, in terms of even the sort of self-analysis that you did and that kind of stuff, I mean, I imagine, had a formal sex education for what it was worth.
What was that like?
The old school, you know, banana thing. And
Yeah. I'm really good at having sex with bananas. That's my secret skill. Yeah, I don't know, just like your kind of average Joe Kiwi sex education, which I think is, you know, through schools, and you have like a 2-day class where the boys and girls are separated.
Yeah.
And you talk about some gross shit, and then you come away being like, well, that's terrifying. But yeah, nothing about desire, nothing about consent, nothing about, relationship attitudes. And my mum and I had the sex talk once, and my parents are pretty liberal when it comes to sex and dating. Like, they knew I was having sex at like 16, and they were just always very encouraging of me being safe, etc. And I was like, Mom, I know how to use a condom, God. But yeah, they were pretty chill.
Yeah, but that was the whole like being sex positive. That's like an influence, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a huge privilege.
Yeah.
That I definitely have, and that's. I don't know how it's come about with my parents being how they are. I think both of them are like throwbacks from repressed families. And so they were kind of that generation where they're like, we want to fix things.
Yeah.
And, my mum, Irish Catholic family, very guilt-laden culturally. Yeah. Same with my dad, Confucianist, Taoist thing going on. So I think both of them being liberal towards sex and dating is something that they actively have tried to do. Mm. But I think also, like, inadvertently, their separation gave me a lot of my framework around relationships and sex as well. Mm. Because, I'm non-monogamous now, and I'm in an open relationship, which is, like, a very dedicated, loving, very consensual and very cool relationship that I think I couldn't have possibly dreamed up if my parents hadn't separated and dated different people and I think those ideas are very embedded in me.
There's a seldom told narrative from parents separating. That's really nice to hear.
Yeah, and I think my mum is a huge influence in that regard because she started dating my high school drama teacher, who is one of my best friends. He's
while you were at school?
No. Oh. After I graduated. Thank God. Thank you, Mum. She had some decency.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, they started dating and then they broke up and then they started dating again. They're together now. And, she describes partners now as kind of like being present for different parts of your life. And it not being a good or a bad thing if people come and go, and that you always have to reevaluate what that means. And that she always says, like, oh, like he seems great. I mean, he might not be your forever man, but he's great for now. And I'm so glad you're having fun and being healthy and happy.
Yeah.
And that's her view now, because she's kind of had this like revolution herself. It's really affirming.
Yeah.
Yes,
brilliant.
radical mum. God,
I love it.
I remember introducing her to my first other partner, because I've been open, but I never had like another partner. Like it got serious. There were feelings. There was love. It was long term. And it was just like water off a duck's back. She just didn't bat an eyelid. She was extremely curious and friendly and open and amazing. And I was like, how does this happen? Yep.
That's brilliant. So, I mean, that all of that comes with a huge sort of influence. A huge thing on like communicating, doesn't it? To be able to, for her and for you, to choose to do that. That's what I've heard anecdotally. Is that you have to be very good at communicating your feelings and analysis, self-analysis, all that kind of stuff.
Be okay with your own company, right?
Be okay with your own company. Be okay with.
Is that true? Is it true what we say?
Is that you're okay with your company?
What's it like on the other side there, Chye-Ling?
Is this kind of your experience too? Is it?
You mean to operate in a non-monogamous relationship?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I don't know, probably because I'm an actor and I like to process through talking. It probably lends itself to a non-monogamous relationship. Yeah. Like those are transferable skills that I feel have helped.
So people in non-monogamous relationships like the sound of their own voice? Is
that
what you're saying here, Chye-Ling?
Yes. No, I think because, like, I don't know. This is probably going back to, like, this might be self-analyzing too much, but both my partner and I had sort of, like, separated parents. So when we went through, like, a big period where we're just both quite sexual people, but also just, like, probably deep down never really truly believed in monogamy. Like, I never actually think that I did. Like, I could never wrap my head around why we do this to ourselves. It's so painful and so awful. And everyone just pretends like it's the thing. And I'm like, everyone's just going around pretending that they don't have eyes for other people. Like, that's insane. But, that led to, like, a lot of cheating and, you know, like, either cheating or, like, wandering eye type of thing that would be, like, emotional cheating. So, you know, after that happened, I think my partner and I were both like, we never want to be in this position again. We always want to be honest. We always want to say what we're feeling and, you know, communicate our desires and wishes so that we're not hurting each other. It's more painful to be cheating on someone than it is to tell your partner, hey, I've got a crush on this person. What do you think? Yay or nay?
And now, this.
At Barbarella's, there was something odd on the line.
Being classification, acumen bar response.
Oh, Tashidilic acumen, it's Bebra from reception. Just got off the line from something called a human being. Really bad line, sounded distant. It wanted to make a booking. Was wondering if you had any intel on what its needs might be?
Well, the ape creatures finally clawed their way into space. They're from a small terrestrial planet known as Earth, on the Orion arm of the Virgo supercluster, orbiting a minor yellow dwarf in a galaxy they unimaginatively call the Milky Way. Bit of a backwater, really. Basically a bunch of tree-dwelling vertebrates who got lucky in the evolutionary lolly toss. If the planet hadn't been smashed by an insignificant asteroid a few mil ago, they'd all be giant, daintily oversubscribed lizards.
What are they into?
Well, themselves, basically. A conflicted species. It's only just occurred to them that their reproductive organs can be used in a recreational capacity. So they're at it like Vesuvian mega bunnies, and then feel guilty about it afterwards.
Interesting.
Not so much. They think zero gravity is fun, believe there are only two genders, and just recently discovered they aren't the only intelligent life in the cosmos. Pitiful, really.
Any tips for the therapists?
Keep it simple. They've only just discovered the dimensions of their genitalia. They were all tip and no iceberg. But tell them not to gear up.
No.
They won't be here anytime soon.
Is a dead human being a human was? Can the lactose intolerant ever visit the Milky Way? Find out in the next installment.
Barbarella's, your pleasure is our business.
And now, to more weapons-grade content.
I'm kind of interested because you sound like you've had this like lovely support from your parents and quite alternative or openness to alternative perspectives around stuff. So I'm kind of interested if you're willing to share, like, what the kind of stumbling blocks in your own sex life have been. If you, have there been any for Chye-Ling? I'm perfect.
I think just the total. This is such a universal experience for women. I think is just like lack of education around pleasure or self-pleasure, self-worth, what sex equates to in terms of like currency in relationships, all of that horrible stuff that you just pick up from media. And the thing is, I don't ever remember anyone saying this to me. And that's why people get really confused because they're like, but who said this? Like, who's teaching these horrible things? I'm like, it's just out there. It just permeates. So, yeah, all of that kind of stuff, like I did, I definitely was coerced into having sex by my boyfriend, when I was like 16. If I didn't feel like it, I would still be like, no, we're dating. This is the thing I have to do now. And, it wasn't great. And in terms of like pleasure, etc., I was having orgasms from when I was like 8 years old.
Well, great.
Which was just, it's something that points to like if we're talking nature nurture, like I didn't even know what sex was at that point. And so I think for me it's nature. I think something inside me is like just has a knack or a leaning towards the sexual side. But even so, when I was first dating boys and men, I wasn't orgasming with them until much, much later on. So I think it's all of that really harmful stuff that you have to unlearn and go like, you should be deserving of pleasure with your partner. You should be able to communicate that your pleasure is worth as much as your partner's. You're doing a collaborative thing and it should be fun for both of you, which is just such a it's such a simple, an idiotically simple concept that takes so much time to relearn. So that's definitely stumbling blocks. But also, like, in open relationships, like, it doesn't take a special type of person to do it. You feel as jealous as everyone else, probably. And you just have to deal with that. And I think over time, it's gotten slowly easier, but, like, really slowly. Like, I'm quite a jealous person, I realized. And that's my biggest roadblock most of the time is, like, I just get infuriated. Like, one time I found, like, a receipt for, like, a pizza delivery in my room. And, like, obviously my partner had someone in there, like, you know, we kind of, like, I do residencies and we kind of live all over the place. But we have a shared living space, which, you know, we are allowed to have people around in, like, if the timing is right, if that person doesn't have their own home, etc., etc. Lots of logistics, lots of, like, Google Calendar. But I found a receipt and it, like, was just, like, on Uber Eats or something, and it had, like, the name of one of my partner's love interests on it. And it was, like, on the bedside table. And I just remember losing my shit. It was the worst. And I wish I could just, you know, wipe that and be like, you know, it's chill, bigger picture. It's a receipt. You know that they're banging. Like, it's a pizza receipt. Like, this doesn't change anything. But, you know, like, those little things will happen constantly, and you just have to learn to forgive yourself and just try and be better.
Yeah.
It's also like a shape, though, isn't it? Like, we see it so much in movies. Like, the moment the receipt is found,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and this is a scene I'm in, you know?
Yeah, and you,
I don't know.
like, a lot of that I think is learned. And I think it's really hard because you're unlearning, you know, like, healthy attitudes around sex. I feel like, as you get older, it's easier to unlearn those things because there's more resource and media around that. But in terms of monogamy, where's the resource narratives or media around that? It's like, you can Google that shit, but you have to go pretty deep to find positive examples.
Yeah. Or even just the analysis of what jealousy is. You know, and what's manifesting and how, you know, it's normally on you and your own, you know, whatever it might be that's triggered it. Your own insecurities or, that kind of stuff, or how you're feeling at the time.
It's just not normalised.
No, I don't think anyone really ever thinks about it too deeply. Yes, interesting. It's going to be... Now, am I right in thinking that you are producing another documentary?
Yeah.
And all of this is going to be dealt with in it, right? Because it's Asian women.
Yes, it is. So Loading Docs have another round that we've just submitted to. So if we get that, Loading Docs, if you're listening. if we get in, we will make Asian women talk about sex. And they have a longer time frame this time. So the idea that one of my directing mentors had at the very beginning was that I put myself in it and kind of follow this whole thing. Like, why is this important to me? And why did it go Asian men first and not Asian women first? And, like, what does it all mean?
Yeah.
All the intersections and that whole vibe.
That's going to be very interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think that Asian women are going to be willing to talk?
Yes.
Yeah?
100%. Probably more than the men, to be honest. Because once Asian men came out, that was the only question that I was asked all the time. Either the Asian men would ask me, can I be in, like, season 2, episode 2, whatever it is. The Asian women were like, so when are you going to make Asian women talk about sex? And it was like, all right, people really want this.
Yeah.
So I don't think it'll be hard at all. We're going to do open calls and try and get as many kind of diverse voices as we can across, like, careers and genders and ages and ethnicities.
Is that disparity in part because of what you talked about earlier around bottom of the food chain versus hyper-fetishization?
Yeah. I think, I'm not sure why it's so hard for men culturally to talk about sex. And maybe it's slightly easier for women because maybe we're always framed around what sex means in terms of our self-worth. We kind of have that conversation going in our heads a lot anyway. So maybe it's quite a cathartic release if someone asks you to talk about it. Whereas with men, I guess you're never asked to think about it or talk about it. It's just kind of assumed that you should.
Although apparently we think about it every 6 seconds or something, don't we?
Yeah, it's this really horrible kind of...
Am I supposed to be?
like you're distilled into like this thing of supposed to be very good at sex and always horny, but like never thinking about the nuances of your experience or the layers of it. Whereas I think women are always thinking about the nuances and layers of their experience because it's being fed to us all the time, and it's something we always have to navigate daily, minute by minute almost.
I'm just interested too, because I know that you've talked about your preferences around Tinder and kind of recognising, where your own like racial prejudice lay or whatever. But have you ever had an experience where you're like, oh, I'm seriously being fetishized here, like this thing of
I'm being fetishized.
Yeah, of white gays, because this is the experience that you're talking about as Asian woman, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's slightly different because I have a lot of white privilege because my mum is Irish, Kiwi, and my dad is Chinese. So I think I definitely can present as white passing to some people. And then other times people are really leaning into the Asianness, and that's when it becomes gross. But I think also people that are biracial or of mixed ethnicity, especially mixed with white ethnicities, it's its own level of fetishization, which is like, Eurasians are the most beautiful people and our mixed babies are always the cutest. And this is something I hear a lot, like, oh, of course you're beautiful because you're Irish, you're mixed race. And it's kind of this like gross thing where you're like, okay, so I'm exotic enough for you to fetishize me, but not exotic enough for you to be scared or challenged. That's my read on it. And like those will be peppered through dates as kind of compliments, and that's when I go like, cool, date is over.
And you've never found yourself leaning into that? Because I know some people's experience of being fetishized is that they lean in and go, ooh, you like it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is currency. This is total currency. I used to feel that way when I was like 18 and going to the clubs. People would be like, oh my God, where are you from? And I'd be like, I'm this, I'm that. And they'd be like, oh my God, that's so exotic. And I'm like, yeah, just me. Like, it's disgusting to think about. But I used to really believe that was a compliment. And yeah, I used to embrace it. But now it disgusts me because I just want to be seen as a person.
What is your advice to little Chye-Ling from that moment? Like, if you could shout something back in time.
Put some clothes on.
Aren't you cold?
A hoe never gets cold. Probably just to stop lying to yourself and everyone around you about what it is you really want and how it is you really feel. I think that was just a huge part of it, was not coming to terms with my sexual needs, which were just not being met by one person, and then we're being met by someone else and then someone else, and it was a big gross mess where I hurt a lot of people. And if I could take that back, I 100% would. Yeah. And just like read some books, like read some feminist like sex books.
Yeah, right.
Get on the interwebs.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask you, like, what would you, like, if Chye-Ling was writing the sex education in schools, the curriculum, I don't know, but, like, if you were doing that, like, what do you think it's important that kids are learning? What do you wish that you had learned in your formal sex education?
I think, firstly, like, self-pleasure. Because I think that informs pretty much all of your sexual encounters. Come from, you got to know what you like and how your body works, and it's not up to anybody else to figure that out. I think that creates two things. One is your lack of autonomy, but the other is, and lack of pleasure. The other is this awful pressure that you're putting on a partner to fill that gap for you, and to know what that is. And then, we can't expect that of people. That's an awful amount of pressure to put on one person. Weirdly, I think it would be self-pleasure. And especially for women, like, I didn't know what masturbation looked like at all. I still don't. I know what it looks like for me.
It's good to have opportunities for growth.
Yes, it is. But when I started, like, sleeping with women or non-men, I was like, whoa, there's a lot of variety here. There's a lot of different things that, like, get people off that I don't respond to at all. Or vice versa, And that would be cool to learn if we just learned about like the spectrum of how pleasure is generated for women.
Yeah.
And men. That would be rad. Yeah, and then of course like consent, that old chestnut, that would be nice. Consent within partners, I think, is a big one. Because, I think we all kind of understood at the time like what consent was in terms of like the extreme end of the scale.
Yeah.
But in terms of those subtleties, it's like I would really have loved to know that I had the power to say no to a partner where I was dating for a year. And also like fetishization, like, oh man, I remember at high school, I was dating a boy who was in my year at high school, and he totally fetishized my school uniform. And I remember at the time being like, okay, I don't really get it, but all right. But now just being like, oh God, I don't like this. No. But yeah. I think it's happening. Like I went on a date with someone who's like a consent and like sexual health. He does like sexual health courses at high schools. And that was cool. We just talked about consent all night. And then I was like, okay, I think this might be a go, eh?
The consent talk was hot?
Yeah, it was. I was great. Like, it takes a lot of courage to put consent on the table, I think. Because you're opening yourself up for a no. Like, just a blatant no.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that takes courage, that takes boldness and bravery, and that's hot.
Yeah.
Like, the act of, being confident enough to do that is attractive. Let alone what else it means, which is just like, man, I just feel real safe with you. Like, safe to get cray. Which is always fun.
I guess I'm also interested in, like, why, like, what is it about making these documentaries and exploring this area that you love? Like, do you love doing it? What do you love about it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it because it's something that is, I think it's close to a lot of people's hearts that they don't get to talk about, or that there's not much resource on it. And I think my kaupapa is often about amplifying marginalised voices, because I'm basically trying to create the kind of role models and materials in the world that I wish that I had. So that's kind of the kaupapa of my entire company, Proudly Asian Theatre, is, when I came out of drama school, it was just like mothballs and, what do you call it, tumbleweed. So I created that company to basically be the sort of company that I would have loved to see and be inspired by when I was at drama school, to go like, Asians are doing stuff. Cool, we got a future here. So I guess in the same way the documentaries act in a similar way. I think that it frustrates me that I never had the access to that kind of conversation in a really open, fun, lighthearted, safe way. And yeah, I guess it's sort of like a wish fulfillment for my past self in a way.
Yeah.
But also it's still very current for me. Like, I'm still figuring these questions out, and I'm definitely not finished with my learning. And I just want to be a better person. And I think, yeah, because I am quite a sexual person, it's pertinent to me. And I think culturally it's pertinent to the world and how we operate. Like, a lot of racism, I realised, is perpetrated in sexual stereotypes. And that's kind of what Orientation was about. A play that I wrote and directed last year is the sexual stereotypes of Asian men and women, and how they influence, your race and dating while Asian, internally and externally, which is also pertinent to me because I encounter it all the time, dating Asian people and dating as Asian. But yeah, I think it's really sad that we don't openly have these conversations, and if I can kind of like, be in some way helpful to pushing that agenda forward, I will. Because it's fun as well.
Yeah.
You learn a lot, and you get to talk to cool people about taboo stuff.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting yarn.
I guess because you're an actor as well, I'm kind of interested because I know that you would have gone into a lot of casting rooms and things and been called up for a lot of roles, and there's obviously been a big overturn globally in terms of women's roles coming to the surface and more complex roles coming up, but obviously there's an intersection there between your race and your gender that I'm interested in, like, what you've observed there over the course of, like, how long have you been acting for?
I graduated in 2013.
Okay, cool.
So, yeah,
in your,
since then.
6 years of floating around,
Yeah.
what have you noticed? And, in casting calls and...
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely... Hilariously, I think in New Zealand it hasn't really changed. And I think that's what's made me really sad. Like, I've got more auditions than I ever have in my entire life in, the last year. But that's only because most auditions I go to come out of Canada or the States or London. And the roles that are coming out of there are, open ethnicity, everything except white, please, mixed race or ethnically fluid, or sometimes really specifically, Asian of any ethnicity, whatever it is. Whereas I think in New Zealand, I don't really see that much that isn't pinpointed or very specific. Like, there was an audition last year that I had that was she was a nail salon technician with an accent. And I was like, okay, that ain't me. That ain't me. I'm white passing at the worst of times, the best of times, sometimes. I'm white passing sometimes. That's not my experience. I feel like this is also perpetuating a trope. I just felt super dicey about that one.
Yeah.
But the American stuff that's coming through is freaking awesome. There are more and more Asian creatives creating roles. There was something I auditioned for the other day that was had Awkwafina and Dumbfounded, the rapper, the Korean rapper, already pegged for a couple of the roles, and I was like, my little heart just was swelling. I auditioned a couple of days ago for a lesbian scientist who's Asian American, and I was like, can I please just do this? This is me. It was great. But yeah, no, it's changed a lot. And I think it's better overseas than it is here. And I'm hoping that New Zealand can catch up.
Yeah, and that's what your work's about. Is that
Yeah.
hard being the engine? It sounds like you're a bit of an engine locally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing my thing with the resources I got. And also the skill set that I have. I'm still learning everything. We wrote so Cole Jenkins and I wrote and co-starred in a web series called Life is Easy. And that has an biracial Asian character and a gay white male character who swap bodies. So it's kind of about wokeness and sexuality and gender, but sort of in a fun, stupid way. But yeah, no, I'm still learning how to write and all that sort of stuff. So it is the burden is pretty heavy because you're I know that a lot of people are rooting for us and a lot of people want to see this representation, but I'm not an expert yet, and so it feels like I'm doing my best, and I'll try and make it the best I can, and
Sure.
no diss on the work, I'm really proud of it, but it's the first thing I've made for screen, that's a narrative fiction. So there is a lot of pressure because, of course, I want to see what I want to see, but I don't know if I'm there yet. But yeah, that character was fun because she's really sexual, biracial, kind of like a fuckboy. Bit of a basic bitch. And I'm like, that's the kind of representation we need. Just dumb, fun characters who, will eventually go on a journey, but can also just be idiots.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Yeah, life is easy, right? Life is easy.
Plug.
Life is easy.
It's on TV,
Asian men
it's on
talk about
demand.
sex. Asian women talk about sex. When are you doing that?
Asian women talk about sex.
Yeah.
Well, if we get chosen, we'll be shooting it mid next year.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a treat in the
That'll be out by
that's the long game.
End of next year, yeah.
Cool.
Projecting into the future.
No, that's good. Yeah.
I do have a great success story about Asian men talk about sex that I just remembered.
Oh, please go.
So this is a few years on. I was dating this really hot guy who was Asian, and we parted ways. He moved to a different country, and then through the time that we were dating, he was getting to know me, etc., getting to know my body of work. Did a little Googling, and so he'd seen Asian men talk about sex, and then when we parted, he was like, that documentary and just you as a person have made me more proud to be Asian than I ever have before. I feel so much more confident, knowing all this stuff, and that documentary really just made me feel heard and seen. So thank you very much. I feel I'm going out into the world as a more confident person in the dating arena.
Rock on.
And I was like, can you not. Make me cry.
Yes.
You should do a little a little hype reel or some, I don't know, with some quotes on there about how it made people feel. That'd be lovely.
Testimonial.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
some
Well,
testimony.
I'll just get him in for if we ever do a season 2 or a follow up. I'll just interview him and be like, let's get meta.
Yes.
So when we watched Asian men talk about sex,
And when we had sex, how was that for you?
on a scale of 1 to 10,
Yeah.
do you have any tips for me that you can...
And where is my clitoris? Chye-Ling Huang, it has been such a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you for
Thanks
sharing
for
all of
having
your
me.
work.
This was fun.
And thank you for all the work you do in the world. You're doing amazing stuff. And we're
Yes.
so grateful.
I'm just
Yeah,
living my life. On my phone.
Keep it up. Keep on helping people.
Yeah. Dope, baby. And this us?
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Hope you loved listening to that podcast. I know we certainly enjoyed talking to Chye-Ling.
It was a good one.
If you are interested in following them, their Instagram handle is @Chye-Ling.Huang, which is CHYELING.HUANG. And if you want to watch their documentary Asian Men Talk About Sex, then go to www.loadingdocs.net, or it's also available on YouTube. And to follow their incredible work empowering Asian stories, they've got an exquisite website called www.proudlyasiantheatre.com, which there's so much amazing stuff happening in that space. So, yeah, keep an eye out. One to watch.
Go check them out. We're still early in this podcast journey of ours, but we've released some amazing interviews already and have some more coming up. You can check out some of the previous episodes where we have talked porn and masculinity, ending HIV, and in the upcoming episodes we've got the future of sex ed, we've got indigenous sexuality, to name but a few. So check those out, and we would also love to hear from you guys too. So we want to hear all you have to say, any love or criticism, feedback, ideas, or topics that you want us to cover, or suggestions for guests or people we should talk to. Send us all that and any emails, pictures, voice recordings to hello@sexandspace.com. We'd love to include them in upcoming episodes. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at sexandspace.com. That's Sex in Space, DOTCOM.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this podcast, then there is nothing wrong with leaving us a lovely review or a
Nothing
little
wrong at all.
5-star rating. It really does help us so much and helps get this conversation and these stories out there even further. So if you've got some spare swipes or some clicks or some shares to go around, we would absolutely love that. And we'll be shouting out all of our amazing comments on future episodes, so please do keep sending us your sexy feedback. A massive thanks, as always, to all our guests, the good folks at Factory Studios, the team at String Theory for their incredible support, to Andrew, Tanya, Brandon, David and Richard for their amazing vocal work, and thank you to the incredible Tim Blower, my co-host. Thank you for making it all the way to the end with us. We adore you, and so join us next week. Bye.
Bye.
If you found some of this material a little challenging, keep coming back and we'll make it really challenging.